Geopolitical Geeks and Random Thoughts. I'm Brian Lamb, and this is my co-host Aaron Workington. Today, we're going to be talking about the rise of China, their economic power, and the potential scenarios that might lead to them dominating their region and possibly the world. Go ahead and take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. We're going to pop up a slide here, give you a couple basic statistics about China or the People's Republic of China. You'll notice that their GDP is almost $15 trillion. They are right behind the United States. And of course, they are a communist nation, but they have, of course, evolved their economy from a pure socialist economy to a more market socialism. One thing I wanted to also bring up is that historically, China has actually been the world's foremost economy off and on throughout the last 2 millennia, since the first century to the 20th century. Sometimes they were the most powerful economy. Other times they actually had great influence economically throughout the world. That has not been true this last century and a half, 2 centuries or so. The U.S. has dominated there, but that is probably about to change.
So, would you say, in like the Chinese view, they're just retaking their place in world history rather than actually, catching up to the rest of us?
Yeah, for China, I think just their sheer size, both in population and resources, it'll always be a cyclical effect for them. Um, the United States has only been an economic superpower since World War One. So
Correct.
that's a
Yeah.
very short period. That's literally just 1 century.
Yeah, and the United States also, yes, they were, they emerged victorious in World War II, but they also were the the number only the only industrial superpower left standing after World War II. So
And I think that's a good point made because a lot of people, I guess the realization as you start reading economic history, especially related to the United States, is because it was the only first world country that still had its industry intact, it was able to quickly dominate the world stage in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
correct. So as like the slide says, the People's Republic of China is now the world's largest exporter. They're also the world's second importer. I'm assuming the United States is the first.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And here's a slide of the China GDP. You can see it. They grew from 1980 onward. They grew relatively slowly until after 2001. So it was either at the end of 2000 or in 2001 that they became a member of the World Trade Organization, and that is basically fast-tracked their economic dominance since then. Mostly because that gave corporations in the U.S. and Europe a green light into investing in China and moving a lot of their production to China. Before they entered the World Trade Organization, the most favored nation trading status in the U.S. was renewed, had to be renewed annually. And so it was never like a certain thing as to whether or not that trade relationship would continue or not.
And I think it's worth bringing up that there were two events in which the United States interacted with China that actually opened the door for other nations, other capitalist nations, to see China as economically viable. One was when President Nixon visited China, and there was sort of like a tacit agreement to begin interacting with each other. And then, of course, when the Clinton administration developed the favored trading nation status system. So
Correct, right. And then that's all out of the way now. So now it's just going on its own legs.
yeah, they no longer need to have these sort of like favoritist agreements with Western powers anymore because they can operate on their own. One thing I wanted to mention is, of course, we all know China is dominated by manufacturing. They make both for themselves and for the world, but also services and agriculture are very huge parts of their economy. They are currently the leading producer of air conditioners, personal computers, solar cells, which a lot of people don't realize. And their agricultural crops, of course, rice, which is a staple in Asian societies, but also wheat, tobacco, and soybeans. These are huge uh, cash crops that are important to a lot of different nations. And they just developed a new 12th 5-year plan. So 12 times 5. They've had a lot of 5 years plans. Latest one is actually related to biotech and renewable energies and alternative fuels, which is a real issue because of they have high pollution in their nation. So they've actually denoted large uh, sums of the government budget to try and develop these new economic areas.
Yeah, and renewable technology is going to be energy is going to be huge in the next century. I would say so. If they move into dominating that that could cement their place as the number one economy in the world. In this slide here, you can see that they're basically at 14.8% of world GDP. The United States is at 24.3%. Whether that stays the same or goes down or vice versa is hard to say. Given current situations, I would say that China is going to probably become more dominant in the future. Given that the United States itself doesn't seem to have any sort of national industrial policy as to what they actually want to dominate or be good at in the future.
Well, and that brings up a point, Brian, related to their philosophy and sort of governmental system. So, of course, China, having the title being communist, they have a centralized economic plan. And we'll mention some of the key players that help drive that central economic plan. So it's like that mix where they have capitalist or private industry, but it still has to have some like subservient component to the government itself. Where in the United States, what drives it is whatever the needs are of the consumers to some extent, or
Right.
or the desire of those producing whatever.
Whereas China still has very large state-owned enterprises that will produce regardless of whether it makes a profit or not.
Yeah. Except their stuff works, unlike in the Soviet Union, they make tractors that never ran. But anyway.
Yeah, true. This is another growth chart here. Did you want to? Oh, okay. So this is the world down here.
Yes.
Okay.
So that shows nominal world GDP, and then it breaks out China's GDP. And you will notice that China has consistently, on its own, grown at a larger percentage than the entire world as a whole. So,
but isn't it true as well, though, that because these are self-published by China, there's a lot of economists that don't actually agree with the accuracy of these numbers?
Yes. So there is some controversy related to even the equation that develops GDP to begin with. The interesting thing about that is, and I will mention this in a little bit, the premier of China, who is essentially the governmental leader, and you'll see right here, he's on the top, Li Keqiang, and that is my best pronunciation. He's premier, civil leader of the government. He is actually an economist by profession, and he rose interestingly through the ranks of the Communist Youth League and was a former provincial governor. What he did was his concern was related to, does GDP and its equation really tell you much about economic health? And he believes not. So he has been developing a new equation that some other economists in the West believe may come to the point as it matures that it will probably be much more accurate.
Is there a name for this equation? Because I know that there's like the National Happiness Index that's been thrown around.
Yeah, and I don't know who actually developed it. I read about it, but I don't know where that was developed.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'd have to look it up. So you were saying as well that Yi Gang he was educated in the U.S.
Yes,
or
yes, correct. So Yi Gang, who's the governor of the People's Bank of China, they basically have control of the monetary policy. He was actually attended and received a degree at the University of Illinois related to economics, and even was associate professor with the University of Indiana, Purdue. So he has a lot of interaction with the United States and Western economic theory, and he's actually a well-published economist.
Interesting. Well, I know that China is on the forefront of developing like digital currencies currently. So it'll be interesting to see like if they do get that off the ground, what kind of things that they can do with it. Because with the digital currency, you can just deposit money into people's accounts immediately. Not that that ability doesn't exist now, but it's still a lot more convoluted doing it now than with a straight digital wallet.
Right. And I think I mean, the People's Bank of China has been looking into sort of transitioning to that in certain parts of the economy.
Right.
So it will be to see how digital currency is interesting too, because remember, they're once again, their country's communist. It's a single party system. They believe it's very important that the whole population sees themselves as a part of the community. So control is an important component.
Oh
And
yeah, there's no doubt it'll be integrated with social credit scores, and who knows what kind of result that will be after
yeah,
that, because that's a lot of control over an individual life.
right.
You can easily track somebody's like purchases and like where they've gone and stuff. Not that we don't have that system in the United States, just more in a more indirect form, but this is
Hmm.
kind of like bringing it to a next level and integrating it all.
See, in the United States, it's based on social media and cultural pressure. In the PRC, it's more kind of a rigorous, organized governmental pressure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, so if China's becomes like the number one economy in the world over the United States and Europe combined, will impact the rest of the world's trade flows in the next century at least, barring any unforeseen internal collapse of China.
Hmm.
Or, you know, they do have a population issue where they are aging rapidly, mostly because of the child policy. So that's hard to say, like what impact that will have over the next 25 years as well. But yeah, they can control the flow of goods. There's been controversies over, the United States has had controversy to trade over like rare earths, because currently all the manufacture and mining of that is done in China. It's almost done nowhere else in the world, even though there are potential sites. And rare earths, they're important for electric cars, cell phones, certain computer chips, military hardware, satellites, things like that.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's something we're bringing up because when it comes to like those special materials that are needed for developing renewable energies and more efficient energy production, the only country I believe that actually has more than China is Russia. But Russia seems both politically and economically incapable of accessing those materials, where
Interesting.
China can efficiently access them. And in some cases, like you mentioned, some of those materials are only found in China at this point.
Right. And yeah, we're mentioning that they can influence global political events. So you've seen that we've seen that China has done major loans to developing countries for infrastructure, ports, like in Madagascar, I think. I'm not sure. There's been a number of African nations they've loaned money to.
Right.
They bought a port in Italy, numerous other places. So this will be interesting to see like what happens if those countries can't pay back their loans. Will this China state-owned enterprises take a haircut? or will they exert some sort of control? This is almost like a different form of imperialism, because a lot of, if you read on the imperialism history of like the European powers in the 19th century, it's exactly what they did. You know, I mean, look at the Suez Canal, right? They chartered a corporate, made Egypt, China charter a corporation to build it, and then put them heavily in debt, and then use that as an excuse to put troops on their land for what, almost 100 years.
Right. Yes. Yeah. When Egypt was technically a part of the Ottoman Empire,
Right.
the British Empire was essentially able to separate it economically and politically.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see in the future if all these infrastructure loans end up being that same kind of vice grip on these countries going forward.
Yeah. And
But in a different form. It's not going to take the same form like the
and these
European colonialism, but it'll probably take a somewhat similar form.
it'll have an impact because this is all a part of we had shown that picture of the leadership before, and the current president and general secretary of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping. He's the one who actually developed the Belt and Road Initiative. That's the program that is involved and wrapped up in providing loans to for these countries, often third world countries, to build infrastructure networks, to be able to export its resources and import finished goods.
Correct.
So the Chinese have led this initiative throughout Asia and Africa.
Right. However, just like the Latin American debt crisis in the 80s, it could blow up in their faces.
That's entirely possible. And then throw in the fact that there has been analysts who have been expressed concern that China is now building up a national debt.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, at a pretty steady rate. So
That is interesting because, I mean, they still have a pretty large trade surplus. I mean, and even
right.
the trade deficit with the United States trade deficit with China, even given all the blustering by Trump late in the last 3 years, because of the coronavirus epidemic, has actually gone up because, guess who produces all medical equipment and masks, and who's buying them?
Yeah, the irony.
Right, exactly. Well, I guess that's it for this week. We'll be back either next week or the week after with a different topic to be decided at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.